Our keynote speaker, Erika Kendrick, is a best-selling author and a national speaker with a psychology degree from Stanford University, an MBA from the University of Illinois at Chicago, a former Chicago Bulls cheerleader. She is the founder of Mental Fitness for Life. Erika works tirelessly on issues of suicide prevention, social and racial justice, and the need to decriminalize mental illness. She has appeared on a number of television, radio, and podcast segments, including Good Morning America, NBC News, CBS News, Fox, The Wendy Williams Experience, and she has taken the stage at TEDx. It is our pleasure to introduce Erika Kendrick.
My name is Erika J. Kendrick, and I'm a suicide survivor. Today, I make it my mission to tour the country and share my story of walking suicide's tightrope. I have witnessed firsthand at colleges and universities, within the Army and the Air Force, and even in middle schools, the need for healing, and even more specifically, healing with culturally relevant services. It's my honor and my privilege to provide tangible tools for communities to use to ensure that they stay anchored in wellness and the happy. But I haven't always been on this side of the mental health and healing thing. And that's why we're here, to talk about hope in healing our diverse communities as it relates to mental health. We'll spend time together tonight covering racism and how it's contributed to the many barriers in our community's ability to access the resources necessary to improve their mental health. We'll also delve into how trauma and mental health disparities have impacted us, especially during this very unique time when we're living in a pandemic and struggling to just survive, rarely being given the opportunity to thrive. And we have to talk about the most common mental health conditions and their treatment options, and finish with ways to walk away together with the resilience and mental fitness tools needed to ensure that we stay anchored in wellness and are happy and to heal. I thrive despite living with a diagnosis of depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. Let me tell you a little bit about me. I became aware that there was a problem when I was in the 3rd grade, and I jumped out of Sister Joyce's 2nd story classroom window because the sassy, insistent voice in my head told me to. And that voice wasn't mine. I was 8 years old. My mom, who's a therapist, put me in therapy right away, although they chalked it up to me being bored, not challenged, not stimulated enough with my schoolwork. I was an A+ student. You know, that kid in class who'd be in the teacher's face after class if there wasn't a plus sign behind the letter A. Excuse me, miss, we need to have a conversation about this grading situation. Yeah, I was that kid. And I was also in dance and drama, singing, even courted for the Olympics and gymnastics. And I was a Girl Scout rock star. I sold over 3,000 boxes of those Thin Mints and Do-si-dos. They called me the Chicago Cookie Queen. And I was on the radio and TV and in the papers. My mental health challenges were overlooked because I was so successful and capable. I get it. My suicidal ideations or thoughts started in elementary school. Here I was, a child already having thoughts of suicide. In high school, the thoughts became more vivid, and making the plan to carry out the action took precedence over my days more frequently. But it wasn't until college, my sophomore year at Stanford University, that the voices in my head grew louder and more insistent that I end my life. I'd been displaying some of the more common signs and symptoms of depression. But my brain pain, a term I created to describe the symptoms occurring inside my brain and my body, didn't stop there. Let's talk about what those are and how they affect the person living with them. Depression is a mood disorder, a medical illness that negatively impacts how you feel, the way you think, and how you act. It looks like feelings of being down or sad with the loss of interest in activities, causing significant impairment in daily life. Depression causes changes in sleep, appetite, energy level, concentration, daily behavior, and self-esteem. Depression can also be associated with thoughts of suicide, all of which I have experienced. I'm going to slow down just a little. I feel like I'm going slowly already, but I want to make sure that the Spanish interpreter can keep up so that everyone is caught up. Anxiety is an intense, persistent feeling of fear, of dread and uneasiness. It might cause you to sweat or feel restless and tense, experience fatigue with a rapid heartbeat. Bipolar disorder is associated with mood swings, ranging from depressive lows to manic highs. Manic episodes can include symptoms like high energy, reduced need for sleep, and loss of touch with reality. While the depressive episodes may include symptoms such as low energy, low motivation, and loss of interest in daily activities, very much like major depressive disorder. Mood episodes last days to months at a time and may be associated with suicidal thoughts. Mine have always been. By the time I was in college, the depression I lived with was causing me to withdraw from activities that brought me joy. So my sorority, my dance team, even my classes. I started sleeping in late, not getting out of bed for days on end. And I felt empty and helpless and hopeless. I was drinking excessively to numb the internal pain that I couldn't even explain. And I was smoking so much marijuana that the first time I checked myself into rehab, I was up to 17 marijuana blunts that day. I'd been feeling all of this sticky stuff since high school, but in college, it really amped up in my head. The feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. There was a tape on rewind in my mind telling me that I wasn't enough. I wasn't good enough or smart enough, short enough, tall enough, black enough, white enough. No matter what I did, I'd never be enough. And that the world would be so much better if I just weren't here anymore. My family would be less burdened and happier if I just weren't here anymore. My friends would be better off if I weren't here anymore, because after all, I didn't deserve to be here anyway. These are very common symptoms of depression and bipolar depression. I just didn't know at the time that I was one of millions living with it. The first time I finally got treatment for the suicidal ideations was after I tried to end my life in college, my sophomore year. I never told anyone about my brain pain or my mental monsters because of stigma. Wikipedia explains that stigma is the disapproval of or the discrimination against an individual or a group based on perceivable social characteristics that serve to distinguish them from other members of a society. My experience with stigma has always been sad. Because of stigma, I was afraid to tell people about my diagnosis. I was terrified that they would leave me, abandon me, shun me. I honestly thought that they'd be scared that they would catch depression or bipolar from me. But this time in college, I couldn't worry about stigma. I was forced to admit that something was wrong. I had to tell my mom, and she had to fly out and bring me home to Chicago, where I was placed in the psych ward under suicide watch. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder with psychosis. And I celebrated this quietly because for the first time, I had a name for this mental monster that had been tormenting me since Sister Joyce's class. And if there was a name for it, that meant other people had dealt with it and even come out on the other side of this thing. And I could too. So I had hope. I also showed signs that something was wrong while I was an NBA cheerleader for the Chicago Bulls. I was enjoying being a Z-list celebrity around town, being VIP at the clubs and rock star parties, drinking and smoking, and not taking care of myself, escaping until the mental monsters in my head found me and told me to do something to hurt someone else. I never said anything because of what I thought others would say about me. And if I'm being honest, I thought they would kick me off the squad. And I worked too hard to get there. I just wasn't ready to accept my diagnosis. So I didn't say anything, and my mental health suffered all the way to having homicidal thoughts. And it was then that I knew that I needed to finally take my mental health recovery seriously. Today, I'm a partner in the healing of our communities across the country with a special focus on the communities that I call home, the underserved, underprivileged, underrepresented communities of color. Because we matter, despite what those in power might suggest through various constructs of racism. Racism is a broad term describing the combination of race-based prejudice and power. There are a few different types of racism that negatively impact our communities. One, systemic racism describes how discrimination shows up in our systems, our educational system, our economic system, our healthcare system, our criminal justice system, and more. It's when individual attitudes of prejudice and bigotry are baked into the cultural institutions. One example of this is that underserved or poor communities receive far less funding than white school districts, or that people in those same communities must travel further to find grocery stores and fresh food, making it more difficult to maintain a healthy diet, which causes several health issues like obesity. Number two, interpersonal racism. This happens between individual people, which is easier to identify than number three, institutional racism, which is similar to systemic racism and is a term that refers to a form of racism embedded in the laws and the regulations of a society or an organization. It shows up as discrimination in areas such as criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, education, and political representation. A few examples of institutional racism would be slavery in our country, or racial profiling in our communities, or even in retail. I know I've been followed around a store or 10 in my day. And my personal example is growing up in an impoverished community of color on the south side of Chicago, where one of the city's regional drug dealers was my best friend when we were 10 years old. His name was Marvin. And Marvin dropped out of school after being suspended, threatened with expulsion, and later sent to a juvenile justice system in the 5th grade. But I stayed in school and went all the way. I was the only one in my neighborhood who did. An exception to the rule is what they call me. Data shows that BIPOC youth with behavioral and mental health conditions are more likely to be directed to the juvenile justice system than to specialty care institutions compared to non-Latinx white youth. This is likely because BIPOC youth, compared to white youth, are much more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system as a result of higher rates of harsh disciplinary suspension and expulsion practices in schools, exactly like what happened to my friend Marvin. Racism has caused these barriers to be present in all facets of our lives. The American Psychological Association explains that these barriers increase stress, which is directly linked to trauma. This is the perfect storm for the onset of mental health challenges in our communities. Some of these barriers that lead to trauma are food deserts, lack of funding for communities of color to access resources, budgets for programming that focus on mental health, equitable and fair policing of our communities with efforts to reduce violence, as well as competitive schools that have representation reflected in the curriculum in the community are needed now more than ever. Barriers can also look like inaccessible mental health facilities staffed with clinicians that don't share or understand our culture. It can also look like banking systems meant to block home ownership or distribute loans at higher interest rates, strapping our communities with increased debt. And we won't leave out unemployment, minimal or no insurance, racial profiling, mass incarceration, and an insurmountable level of stress. That, again, leads to trauma and a mentally unfit community. But before this turn on my mental health ride, I didn't have the resources in my underserved, underprivileged neighborhood to seek out help for the many symptoms I've been experiencing. And at my predominantly Black elementary school, we didn't have a mental health counselor or even a school nurse for that matter. The resources just weren't there. And today they can be. We need more BIPOC therapists, case managers, psychiatrists, and social workers. We need you now more than ever. When I went to the elite college prep high school, there was a nurse there, yes, but I never felt comfortable talking to her. She didn't get me, right? She didn't understand me culturally, and she didn't have the background to see me. At least that's how I felt. And that's what mattered. These barriers to accessing the help, the resources I needed to begin to heal. The experience we have with mental illness is greatly affected by our unique cultural views and backgrounds. To effectively serve diverse populations, the community and the mental health professionals need to understand, respect, and value all of the cultural differences and perspectives we have toward mental health. Increasing and applying cultural competence, which describes the ability of healthcare systems to provide care to patients with diverse values, beliefs, and behaviors, and take into account their social, cultural, and linguistic needs. That's important when serving diverse communities. The first time I was admitted to the psych ward and diagnosed with severe depression, the white psychiatrist and the white nurse both told my parents to keep my childhood bedroom ready because I'd never amount to being much more than a vegetable. This was racism. This was cultural misalignment and insensitivity to who I was as a young Black woman who had been on a demonstrated track to success. Clearly, they didn't have an idea or a concern for my capabilities, as they didn't take the time to understand. They never asked us any questions about my circumstances, not about school or my grades or my extracurriculars, achievements, my potential. Eventually, I went on to do the intense work to get to the other side of this mental illness thing. But that discrimination and racism, it could have slowed me down or stopped me altogether if I or my family would have believed them. It didn't make it any better when they strongly pushed me to have electroconvulsive or shock therapy instead of cognitive, behavioral, or psychotherapy. My father was against shock therapy and forced them to back down. Without him as an ally, I probably wouldn't have gotten the help I needed. We need more education and allies. Growing up in an underserved community was one of the many challenges I faced. I lived in a bedroom that had bullet holes in the window screen, a reminder that violence was always on the corner of my block. There was toxic stress on every street corner of my neighborhood and in my house. And there was definitely trauma. My father was bipolar and he self-medicated with drugs and alcohol, although he was amazing. My mom turned to other things to deal with her trauma that eventually led to mental health challenges as well. She's also amazing. My father died, but my mom is still dealing with them, and so am I. But this is not new in our communities of color. The trauma and toxic stress are everywhere, and so is the racism. The most recent time our country has had to look racism square in the eye has been during the pandemic, where COVID-19 has shined a blinding light on the inequities that we have to battle daily. Over the past year and a half, we've seen that many of our poorest neighborhoods and communities have suffered disproportionately from the spread of COVID-19. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention agrees. They report that racial and ethnic minority groups have been put at increased risk of getting sick and dying from COVID-19. Again, the reason is racism, discrimination that can lead to toxic stress, that leads to trauma and other mental health challenges. This discrimination can be found in those same barriers to health that we've already talked about. Housing, healthcare, education, criminal justice, and finance. Another reason why we've been put in increased danger during the pandemic is healthcare access and use. Our communities have significant challenges accessing healthcare because of lack of insurance, transportation, childcare, the inability to take off work to get to a doctor. And you add to that cultural barriers like language and historical events like the Tuskegee study, which conducted a syphilis study on 600 Black men, 399 men with syphilis, 201 who didn't have it, without the patient's informed consent and without providing adequate treatment for their disease. This happened in the 1930s at the Tuskegee Institute, but has since caused a widespread and continuous distrust in the medical system from the same people who need healthcare the most. Housing has also been a contributing factor to the increased risk of getting COVID as well. living in crowded conditions, as a higher percentage of us from minority groups do, it makes it difficult to separate and quarantine when someone in the household contracts COVID. The CDC's documented that people in our communities often work as essential workers and are exposed more often than non-frontline workers, where we live, where we learn, where we work and play and worship has all been a major factor associated with more COVID-19 cases, hospitalizations, and yes, deaths. These lead to toxic stress and to trauma. Again, it's all connected and it all matters. But we can fight this for ourselves and for each other because our mental fitness matters. In addition to COVID-19, many of our marginalized communities are also grappling with economic uncertainty and the civil rights movement 2.0, as I've called it, that was reignited with the killing of George Floyd, followed by so many other killings of African Americans and other people of color, leaving Black Americans with increased mental health issues. Although anyone can develop a mental health issue, Black Americans sometimes experience more severe forms of mental health conditions due to unmet needs and other barriers. According to the Health and Human Services Office of Minority Health, Black Americans are 20% more likely to experience serious mental health problems than the general population. Black youth who are exposed to violence are at a greater risk for PTSD by over 25%. Black Americans are also more likely to be exposed to factors that increase the risk for developing a mental health condition, such as homelessness and, again, exposure to violence. In the Black community, people often misunderstand what a mental health condition is due to lack of education. This misunderstanding leads many to believe that a mental health condition is a personal weakness or even a form of punishment. Many Black Americans have trouble recognizing the signs and symptoms of mental health conditions, such as what we've talked about, anxiety and depression, which leads them to underestimating the effects of these same mental health conditions. I was one of those Black people. My family didn't have the education around mental illness, and as a result, we missed all of the signs. In general, Black Americans may also be reluctant to discuss mental health issues and seek treatment because of the shame and, again, the stigma that's still associated with these conditions in our communities. I wasn't able to admit to myself or anyone else that I was diagnosed and struggling with a mental illness until I tried to drive my car off a cliff. Stigma is real, and mental illness doesn't discriminate. It's in all of our communities. The Anxiety and Depression Association of America reports that common mental health disorders among Latinos are generalized anxiety disorder, major depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and alcoholism. While Latino communities display a similar susceptibility to mental illness as that of the general population, they experience health disparities that affect the way they receive mental health care, such as the access and quality of treatment. Only 20% of Latinos who experience symptoms of a psychological disorder talk to a doctor about their symptoms. That's only 1 in 5. And only 10% contact a mental health professional. That's 1 in 10. Seeking out treatment is essential to healing. Finding a trained clinician who demonstrates cultural competence and awareness for the Latinx community can save lives. But we still have a long way to go. Approximately 34% of Hispanic Latinx adults with mental illness receive treatment each year, compared to the US average of 45%. 34% versus 45%. And 15.7% of Latinx people in the US live in poverty, compared to 7.3% of non-Hispanic whites. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, in 2018, 19% of Hispanic people had no form of health insurance. A high percentage of impoverished people don't. And for immigrants who arrive without documentation, the fear of deportation can prevent them from seeking help. Barriers to treatment. A large barrier to treatment in the Latinx community, as with other ethnic minorities groups, is that talking about emotions is not a common part of the culture. So treatments such as cognitive behavioral therapy, where sitting down with a mental health professional, it's simply not effective. There's also a lack of understanding and knowledge regarding mental health, which increases the stigma associated with mental illness. Language is also a barrier, as many medical professionals just don't speak Spanish, and those that do may not understand the cultural issues that Latinos face. Other barriers, again, include lack of health insurance, legal status, and misdiagnosis. Although treatments for depression and anxiety disorders, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, show effectiveness in Latino populations when used, Latinos underutilize these treatments. The Anxiety and Depression Association of America also states that in some cases, Latinos may cope with mental health issues by seeking advice from friends or family members or spiritual advisors, and may not seek help from mental health professionals. In other cases, though, there's a lack of understanding and knowledge regarding mental health and mental illness, very much like what occurred in my household growing up. This only increases the stigma associated with mental illness. Also, there can be uncertainty about how to access services for themselves or for their loved ones. And again, language is that barrier that many providers just don't speak Spanish or understand the cultural issues important to Latinos. So one more time, other barriers include lack of health insurance, legal status, misdiagnosis, and medical mistrust. How do we begin to resolve this? Like right away, like today? Well, we have to take into account the social, the cultural, and the linguistic needs of the Latinx community. Otherwise, we just end up where we already are, with misdiagnosis and inadequate treatment. When meeting with a potential provider or clinician, it's perfectly okay to ask questions to get a sense of their cultural sensitivity. Like, here are three. Number one, have they treated other Latinos? Again, have they treated other Latinos? Number two, have they received training in cultural competence? That's a big one. And number three, how do they plan to take your beliefs and practices into account when suggesting treatment? I wish my family would have known to do the same when I was diagnosed, truly. To help get started, a quick search online yields resources specific to the Latinx community. Some of my favorites. Number one, NAMI's Compartiendo Esperanza. It aims to increase mental health awareness in Latino communities by addressing key topics, such as the signs and symptoms of mental health disorders, like anxiety disorders, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and depression. We've talked a lot about those already tonight. Number two, the American Society of Hispanic Psychiatry. They work to foster collaboration in mental health treatment with a specific focus on Latinx populations. And number three, Therapy for Latinx. They serve as a database of therapists who either one, identify as Latinx or have worked closely with Latinx communities, and they understand their needs. Accessing the resources that are out there will help get rid of some of the barriers to treatment. It's an amazing start. People often ask, how or why did me and my family miss the signs? Well, the answer is one that explains why we're all here today. Communities of color or BIPOC communities don't generally have the education to begin to access the language to describe their experience with their mental health. I didn't know how to say to my father when he asked me what was wrong, when I'd been crying, that I was experiencing severe depression and having suicidal ideations, or that I was manic and in the middle of an episode. Our communities also don't have the funding to provide the resources and programming necessary to begin healing. In my neighborhood, there wasn't even a hospital, much less a psychiatric facility that could assess me and properly diagnose me. That only happened for me at Stanford University. And even when I was finally diagnosed, the white staff didn't take the time to listen to me. Another reason we missed the signs was because of stigma. We talked about this, that fear of being judged, for me, of being labeled crazy, of being ostracized from my family and friends. This is what caused me to do my best to hide the signs and symptoms of my mental illnesses. And to be honest, I wasn't exactly ready to deal with them anyway. Before I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, we missed those signs too. I would swing between feeling overly happy or high, elated for long stretches of time. Then I'd feel down, sad, hopeless, helpless. I felt empty. And I grappled with suicidal thoughts that led to me making a plan. I also felt easily agitated, jumpy, twitchy. I talked really, really fast, mostly because of the racing thoughts. And then came the extreme restlessness and impulsivity that led to recklessness with impaired judgment. Yes, I was a mess. And it was all untreated because we didn't have the education to recognize the signs. I didn't get a bipolar disorder diagnosis until it all came tumbling down. Okay, I was flying high one day from smoking, abusing weed. One of the side effects of smoking marijuana is the munchies. And my favorite munchies of choice was always cereal. On this particular day, I was walking down the cereal aisle in the grocery store, and I was saying, "What's up" to my homies? You know, Tony the Tiger, the Trix Rabbit, Count Chocula. I giggled as I imagined them saying hello back to me, until the day they actually morphed off the boxes and swirled around my head, talking to each other. And then they turned to me and started talking to me. It was my very first panic attack in public. And I was forced again to take my mental illness seriously when they called the paramedics and took me to the hospital. That's when I was diagnosed with early onset schizophrenia that was later said to have been psychosis, a possible side effect of marijuana abuse. But even with all my mental monsters and their very ugly heads, I still wasn't ready for treatment. I was barely even ready to say the words mental illness aloud. That's the stigma or the fear of judgment. But I'll admit, when I finally was ready, the treatment that worked for me was just good old-fashioned cognitive behavioral therapy or talk therapy. pulling back the layers of me to determine the best way to fit the circle of me into the square of life. There was also group therapy. Being around other people who were experiencing the same brain pain ensured that I didn't feel alone in this journey to wellness. I enjoyed art therapy, and I even enjoyed hospitalization, where I was given the time and space to learn about this part of me and eventually accept all of me. Medication therapy didn't work though, not until many years later. And I mean many. Today, I take one pill for bipolar disorder, and that pill's been a game changer. I call it the magic pill. We all have to do what's best for us, right? And those around us that we are charged with loving and supporting. We need you. As a human community, we've been experiencing a monumental, historic shape shift over the last year and a half. And it's uncomfortable, and it's raw, and scary, and painful. The world around us is changing, and we have to change with it. We have to be resilient, physically and emotionally. That means recovering quickly from difficulties and being tough and emotionally adapting to stressful situations and crises. Being resilient doesn't mean that we won't experience this pain or distress, right? Like COVID-19 and the civil rights movement 2.0 might be our generation's biggest test, and the trauma left in its wake is real. Nelson Mandela got it right when he said, "Do not judge me by my success. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." But it isn't easy. Racism and discrimination, barriers to overall and mental health, the inequities of COVID-19, and our country's civil unrest are overwhelming constructs that make it perfectly okay to not be okay. Because again, this isn't easy. And it's okay that all of this affects people differently. There's confusion and hurt and fear. There's anger. There's hopelessness and helplessness and rage and frustration. But we'll all emerge even stronger than before if we band together as a community and commit to beginning to heal. Some of my favorite paths to healing involve meeting us as a community right where we are. There's significant evidence to show that many people within culturally diverse communities are likely to turn to avenues other than professional therapists for dealing with mental distress, such as elders in the community or religious leaders, priests, tribal leaders, and traditional healers. In some cities across the country, barbers are being given mental health first aid courses to assist them in dealing with their clients in distress. I mean, and it makes sense. I know my beautician at the beauty salon knew all my business and talked me through so much of my sticky stuff, even before I was ever diagnosed with a mental health challenge. When we work through our sticky stuff or our personal challenges with people who understand our plight, there's an element of trust and understanding that is often necessary for healing. We talked about this. This inevitably leads to more patient participation and engagement, right? It fosters respect and improved understanding from those who need the healing. These positive, culturally responsive mental health resources can exist in collaborations, in partnerships, community-based health systems, and this can make all the difference in getting folks the resources and services that we need, especially when it comes to suicide prevention and awareness, the life-saving conversations necessary to address the needs of our communities. Suicide is more prevalent than ever before in communities of color. It's the 10th leading cause of death in our country, with 47,511 deaths by suicide in 2019 and 1.38 million attempts. The Suicide Prevention Resource tells us that since 2010, the suicide death rate has increased for all races and ethnicities. In 2019, American Indian, Alaska Native adults were at the highest risk for suicide-related thoughts, followed by Hispanic and white adults equally. In 2019, Black adults were at the highest risk, followed by Hispanic, then white, and American Indian, Alaska Native adults equally. In addition to working within the parameters of the community, we can band together to demand more education around mental health in our communities and our schools. We can fight for interpreter services, the recruitment and retainment of minority staff, using community health workers, including family and community members in healthcare decision-making, and providing language competency that goes beyond the appointment desk, the advice lines, medical billing, and even writing materials. We can also continue to have healthy dialogue around bias and white supremacy. The more allies we recruit in power positions, the stronger our message of equity, of inclusion, and healing becomes. Additionally, we can lobby for more policies and legislation to increase funding for programming and resources. One of my favorite things to do is work with the National Alliance on Mental Illness and trek up to the state capitol with a large group of influencers and lobby for improved legislation. Over the years, being a voice for the voiceless has yielded results. I see it when I'm working with the police departments and the sheriffs and the first responders, teaching de-escalation and working toward a tomorrow where the mentally ill in our communities aren't criminalized. And we can't ignore that we need greater diversity within the mental health field and culturally competent providers like we've discussed. Also, incentivizing the completion of treatment is an option. I know when I was 19 and unwilling to accept my diagnosis or take my recovery seriously, an incentive or a reward, something that mattered to me, might have swung the pendulum closer to the finish line. Maybe, possibly, but definitely worth a try. Regardless of how we choose to move forward and address the needs within our communities, if the stress and the trauma are left untreated, it'll inevitably take a physical and emotional toll, far worse than what we're dealing with today. We have to remain strong, resilient, tough. All right, but how? Okay, well, there are 4 powerful strategies that we can do as individuals to ensure resilience and toughness. After everything we've experienced in our communities and in our country, I know we can definitely do tough. All right, one thing to do is to focus on building your support squad. And I'll talk about this again in a bit, but prioritize healthy, functional relationships. Connecting with empathetic and understanding people can remind us that we're not alone in difficulty. Focusing on finding trustworthy and compassionate folks who validate our feelings and who also hold us accountable, well, that's key. While I was in the midst of my brain pain, I had my family and my friends and my Girl Scout crew there to support me. Although no one really understood what was happening to me or what depression even was back then in my community, they were still there for me. Sometimes I get things like, snap out of it, or just get over it, or shake it off. But with 16 million people in the United States challenged with depression, It wasn't something I was just going to be able to just get over or shake off. I needed help, but they didn't understand, and that's okay. Because today we have conversations, we have news coverage, we have celebrities taking the proverbial mask off and sharing their mental health challenges. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But for Black and Brown folks, it's been a long journey getting to these safe spaces for these life-saving conversations. The second thing we need to do is make sure we don't isolate. Make the time to spend with your support squad. Zoom dates are still super cool with friends and family that are spread across the country. Old school phone calls and texts are central during these times as well. Now, I'm not a big phone person, and my support squad knows that. So we plan play dates for that glass of wine, okay, fine, or that exercise activity. It helps. It truly, truly helps. The third strategy to ensure resilience is to seek help. And we've talked about what that can look like. It can be a therapist, a psychologist, a life coach, a faith-based mentor, or even a school counselor. It's important to find a trained clinician who demonstrates cultural competence. Unfortunately, research has shown that lack of cultural competence in mental health care, which results in, again, misdiagnosis and inadequate treatment, very much like my parents who were encouraged to give up on me. But when you meet with your prospective person, ask those questions that we've already discussed, right? Do they have cultural sensitivity? Have they treated other people of color? Received training in cultural competence? And how do they plan to take your beliefs and your practices in account when suggesting treatment, right? Just a reminder. And then the last strategy is to join a group. Civic groups, faith-based communities, or other local organizations provide social support and can help us reclaim hope. Some of these groups give us a sense of ownership instead of helplessness. By participating in activities that create positive programming or even protesting has been shown to be cathartic and empowering to many. Where can you go to find these groups? Google and social media are really good starting points to identify like-minded folks who share values and viewpoints to move our communities into a positive, equitable direction. To combat racism, we need allies more than ever. All right. There are so many ways today to become an ally to the BIPOC community. I've been so excited to tell you this. One way is to do your research and learn what's been done before. What's worked? What still needs to change moving forward? Another way, my favorite way, is to listen. The truth is, to best understand how to help BIPOC, you need to listen to what they are telling you. Local speakers, Zoom sessions, podcasts, all are good places to start. All right, not practicing performative allyship is a really big deal these days. Essentially, that means not using the struggles of others to make yourself look like a better or more moral person, particularly on social media. Speaking up in your own social circles, even when it feels uncomfortable, is paramount. You have a lot of power there. Use it. Learning from your mistakes, which we all make, is essential to moving forward as an ally. Amplifying BIPOC voices and their messages, another great way to be an ally. And so is showing up in spaces to educate your peers, attending protests and marches, signing petitions, and donating if you can. And lastly, doing the big work by acknowledging whether you've contributed to a racist society and making a plan to do better. With allies, we are so much stronger and able to combat the important things like barriers to our health and our mental health and our mental fitness. Our mental fitness should always be at the center of our everyday. Caring for our mental fitness, both inside and out, reduces stress, reduces depression and anxiety. All right, I'm going to pull up some slides with a few quick ways to consider mental fitness. Number one, I told you I'd go back to this, having a dynamic support squad. They hold you accountable and they love you unconditionally. This improves our emotional health. So this square at the bottom, I call it the box of feelings. These are ways that your support squad should make you feel. You should feel affirmed, supported, loved, trusted, respected. You should feel secure, protected. I challenge you to name 5 people in your support squad and then be honest about how they really make you feel. It gets tricky because sometimes we have toxic people in our circles, right? In our cliques and our crew and our fam. That's so different from your support squad. You intentionally pull people into your support squad who make you feel valued. The second thing is therapy. I think everybody breathing should be in therapy to help you navigate what I've been calling the sticky. It gives you strategies and tools to deal with stress. And if you've never been to therapy, it's like, well, what would I even discuss? Well, some of the struggles you have every day, or what you've been constantly thinking about or obsessing over or ruminating about. Where do you need strategies or where you've been stuck? The third thing is clean eats. Food, what we put into our bodies, plays a big role in the way that we feel, which then informs the way that we behave. Clean eating can help with depression, schizophrenia, ADHD, Alzheimer's. Well, how do I do that? My life is so hectic. I know our lives are so hectic now. Quick cheat sheet. Half your meals, fruits and veggies, whole grain, healthy protein, healthy oil, and drink plenty of water. I've got mine right here. I know that looks pretty gross, but that was from a green smoothie. I made a vegetable smoothie earlier. I'm trying, y'all. I'm trying. All right, the fourth thing is visualizing your happy place. We all should have one. That place that makes you just experience authentic joy. And it could be something from a movie, a TV show, a commercial, something you saw in a magazine, the kitchen, which is what most women tell me around the country when we do this exercise, or the bathroom, which is what most men say. Get comfy, identify the happy place, and then relax your body. Close your eyes and go through your 5 senses to experience your happy place. If we were doing a workshop, I'd ask you to close your eyes and tell me, what do you see there? What do you hear? How does it feel? What do you smell? And how does it taste? Which leads us right into meditation. Meditation is a powerful tool, and it's also free, and there are tons of apps online, but it helps with depression and substance abuse, anxiety, OCD. Very similar to visualizing our happy places. Find a quiet location, get comfy, focus on your breath, close your eyes and observe your thoughts without judgment. And as they come, dismiss them. This is one that most people roll their eyes at me over. Exercise. All right, it has incredible benefits, just like meditation. It reduces anxiety and depression. It's a stress reliever. It makes us feel good about ourselves because when we look good, we feel good. It increases our self-esteem. We sleep better. And studies have shown antidepressants and exercise have had the same effects on folks dealing with depression. That's a mind-blowing fact. Antidepressants and exercise, the same effects. I start back on my workout routine tomorrow. All right, and then we have sleep. We need to reboot our bodies and our brains. Better mental and emotional resilience. When we don't get enough sleep, it leads to stinking thinking and emotional vulnerability. I have to get 8 hours of sleep. I was very excited about today, so I didn't quite get 8, but I'm going to make up for that tonight. Believe me. All right, and this is my favorite. Music. I think everyone should have a happy playlist. Music affects our oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin, and norepinephrine. Those are the feel-good chemicals that our bodies naturally produce. It keeps our mood elevated and keeps us anchored in our happy. This is another challenge. Think of your top 5 songs and how do they make you feel? They should make you feel uplifted, powerful, strong, happy, joyful, not terrified or anxious or pressured. Some of our favorite music brings us down, like Adele, who's releasing an album, but people love her. I say, be careful and be conscious of, again, how does it make you feel? All right, and the 9th out of 10 is soul service, volunteering. It also releases feel-good chemicals. Volunteering keeps us anchored in wellness as we are doing for others. I like to say it gets me out of my mind, which can be a dangerous place. Well, we're all busy. We just talked about that. How do I incorporate volunteering into my everyday? I encourage you to think of activities that you already enjoy and then put the volunteer spin on them. Painting, working with animals, feeding the homeless. And then the 10th, animals, I just said, furry friends. Studies have shown that just rubbing a furry animal can reduce our anxiety. It can also lift us from depression. I have a furry friend, my service animal, Isabella Sunshine. She's a 4-year-old Maltese, and she travels the country with me on my Who Moved My Happy tour. And we're in airports constantly, train stations, all high stimuli environments. And she calms me when I get anxious. You can volunteer at a pet store to be around furry friends if you don't have pets. Oh, this is Isabella Sunshine. She's the cutest. And she likes to lamp when she's not on service duty. I don't want you to be like this lady. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that furry friends can really be an essential tool. But it's number 10 because some people are horribly afraid of animals and or allergic, and I get that. Your last and final challenge. What are the incredible 10 mental fitness steps? What can you remember? It's okay, it's not a pop quiz. Here you go again. I live by these, I swear by these. They have changed my life. All right, the big thing with mental fitness is being goal-oriented, okay? Always striving for the happy, for the wellness. Developing realistic, okay, but quantifiable goals is necessary. Your goals can be small, even if it means cooking that day or checking on someone in your support squad or joining a group like we discussed. We all have to accept that change is happening all around us and it's happening fast. Frederick Douglass told us that if there is no struggle, there is no progress. But we can implement our strategies and use our tools to maintain a hopeful and mentally fit outlook. You got this. We got this. I'm going to say a handful of affirmations to make sure that we got this. And I want you to repeat after me. Now, I know you're on mute, so we can't hear you, but I can see your mouths moving. Number one, repeat after me. We are enough. We will keep going. We are enough. We are committed to our purpose. We are enough. It's okay to not be okay. We are enough. I am enough. Today, I'm with you. I'm showing you. I'm proof that we don't have to live with brain pain and suffer in silence, and neither do our loved ones or others in our communities. We're not alone. This life thing can get sticky, and that's okay. There are resources available to provide help and instill hope, and we need it now more than ever. In our community, 1 in 4 people is struggling with a mental health challenge. Like right now, 1 in 4 people. I think that number is much more terrifying because, as we've discussed, Black and Brown communities don't report. My mental monsters didn't win. Yours don't have to either. Somewhere along the way, I realized that my life was worth it. Hear me clearly. If you're living with a mental health challenge or loving someone who is, you and they are worth it too. You and they are worth it too. Thank you for allowing me to share soul space with you and to be of soul service tonight. I love you. I love you. I love you. And I don't have to know you to love you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We want to take this opportunity to ask anyone if they have any questions to please write it in the chat. And we're just going to give it about 30 seconds.
As you see, I'm an open book, so feel free to ask any questions. Nothing is too personal or invasive.
We do have a question. What tips do you have for teens who are struggling with mental health?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I work with teens around the country and their caregivers, and the truth is that the same tips I would give adults, I would give to teens. Number one, it's okay to not be okay. They so often feel that perfection is the answer. And with all the stressors and pressures, including social media on them today that just haven't historically been present for some of us in other generations, they have a lot on them. So just accepting that it's okay to not be okay is great, number one. Number two, design and nurture a support squad, right? The group of folks that you intentionally select that you know are going to love you unconditionally and hold you accountable. That's critical. Those are the folks you can go to and take off the mask and be honest with and be upfront with about whatever your challenges are, mental health or otherwise. Then I would say, talk to someone you trust. And for teens specifically, I say, talk to a trusted adult. It doesn't have to be a therapist or a psychologist. It can look like a school principal. It can look like a teacher. It can even look like a crossing guard, all folks you trust that then have the resources to get to someone to provide an immediate intervention if it's necessary, depending on the circumstance. I would also say if there is an emergency. What does that mean, Erika? If you're having thoughts of hurting yourself or hurting someone else, then I encourage them to go directly to a trusted adult and be honest about that so that they can get the help that they need. Because no matter what, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And our goal is prevention. So those are 3 or 4 really good tips that I would give. But again, they're applicable for adults as well.
Okay, I'm going to combine a few questions here. We have a couple people asking, how long did it take you to feel ready to get help? Were you hesitant at any point in getting
Yes.
help?
Yes, great question. It took me 20 years to get help about. So I've been dealing with severe mental health challenges as far back as the 3rd grade. And even when I tried to drive my car off a cliff on top of one of the mountains behind Stanford's campus, I still wasn't ready to get help. I was excited to know what had been, what the name for these mental monsters that had been tormenting me all these years were. Like, I was very excited to know that there's a real thing happening to me and I'm not imagining it. But because of stigma, and fear, I just wasn't ready to get help. It wasn't until I tried to hurt one of the NBA cheerleaders. That's when I pulled over to the side of the road. I tried to hurt her with my car, and I stopped at the streetlight and broke down. And I knew then that I would either end up in jail or dead. And the idea of hurting someone else is what really pushed me to say, I have to surrender. This thing is much bigger than me. And so in AA and NA, they call that the rock bottom. It's the exact same thing for me. I couldn't face myself after that.
Okay, another question. Do you believe that these health disparities among minorities will continue to increase or stay relevant or decrease? Is there something one can do to decrease these trends?
Yeah, so if we don't act collectively, they'll continue to increase. There were different points I talked about what we can do as a community to band together, and then what our allies can also do to
one more, and then, oh, sorry.
No worries. Did you want to say something? No, okay. And then the necessity of having our allies step up and use their power and their voices to continue to push this movement forward. I do believe that things can shift and change. I've seen it in my own lifetime with Black and Brown folks beginning to have conversations around what mental illness is, and then what treatment options are available, and then how do we access them. When I am fighting for legislation at state capitals, I see the repercussions of the fight when we get funding for programming, or we get a mental health facility reopening. But it's not going to happen if we don't collectively step up and use our voices to fight for those that are suffering in silence.
Okay, we're going to take one more. What other resources do you recommend for those who are in the helping profession to become more culturally competent?
I'm sorry, say that one more time, please.
Sure. What resources do you recommend for those in the helping profession to become more culturally competent?
Oh, great question. Resources. Well, I would start with, there are a plethora right now after COVID-19 and the racial and economic disparities that became very obvious to anyone who could see, and then the civil rights movement 2.0. What I suggest that folks do is a quick Google search, and you'll get pages. I've worked through them with folks and over the last year, and pull out those that speak to the kind of helping that you're either doing or would like to be doing. I also encourage using social media. There are a lot of, I'll just say Facebook, for example, there are a lot of Facebook groups that are about the work of ensuring that people that want to be available and active can do so. And then they have, they use the platforms that they have to strategize and then come up with tangible things to get voices heard. And that could look like podcasts, that could look like Zoom sessions, that could look like the petition, signed petitions on change.org. I've seen a lot of that. Or it could look like donating to various organizations that are about that business right now. I mean, besides just Black Lives Matter, which has been fantastic in creating and effecting change, but there are a plethora of others, and there'll be some that inevitably will speak to you. So my suggestion is definitely to use Google, use social media, especially if you have a presence already on social media. Use your favorite platform, if that's TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, LinkedIn, and then just start doing searches. And then I would encourage you to be an ambassador and then share that with others, because if you're ready and you have that same question, once you find your answers, there are other folks who would benefit from that as well.
Thank you, and we'd like to thank everyone who put a question in the Q&A. If you still have questions, please go to our website and send us your questions, and we'll try our best to answer them. We would like to thank Erika for her presentation tonight. We would like to thank our sponsors for helping to make this forum possible. Lastly, we would like to thank the audience for taking time to be with us. Without community support, this forum would not be possible. We have a short survey that will pop up on your screen. Please take the time to fill it out. Your feedback really does help us to better improve our forum. You can also visit us at our website, theallianceformentalwellness.com. Thank you, stay safe, stay well. Good night.
Good night.